Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan, and with the news that Zdeno Chara has returned to his original team in the New York Islanders, I thought it'd be a ton of fun to look at a bunch of recent NHL players that have gone back to their home team, their original or former NHL teams, to see how they did with those teams. And there has been a ton of players over the past decade that have done the exact same things that Zdeno Chara has, but there's been a lot of players that have experienced great success, but also extreme failure. So when it comes to all these players, how do their careers pan out with their former teams, and how do they do throughout the rest of their NHL careers? Watch till the end for all the storylines and all the picks, and make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are new. 60% of the people that are watching are not subscribed. If you like hockey, this channel is the place to be. Now, the most recent instance of a player going back to his former or original NHL team is obviously the guy that we're going to headline here in Zdeno Chara, a guy that was drafted by the Islanders 56th overall back in the 1996 NHL draft. This was a player that has only spent 4 seasons with the Islanders, but it was a bad time for him, especially even though he had potential with his size and his defensive play. This was still a guy that was raw in the Islanders system, and during the time he played in 1998 to 2001, it wasn't exactly a great time for the Islanders organization or the players there, and it was pretty much dysfunctional from head to toe. Chara was affected by that and was ultimately moved to the Ottawa Senators, then onto the Boston Bruins, where he became the most well-known. Now he is back though with the New York Islanders after 20 seasons, back on a 1-year deal at 44 years old, and I would say with a much better chance to win the cup than he did 20 years ago. He's going to be on a great team, and he's back to his hometown team that drafted him in 1996. But now moving on to the second NHL player that returned to his original team, we're going to move on to another young player that got shipped off pretty early in his career to a different team and found some major success afterwards, but is back with his original team via a trade this last year. We're going to move on to number 2 and move on to Jacob Voracek. The Blue Jackets selected him 7th overall back in 2007, and his first few seasons in the Blue Jacket system were pretty good, honestly. He played in the NHL at 19 years old, where he got 38 points in 80 games played. Then the next year got 50 points in 81 games played, and then in 2011, he ended up getting 46 points in 80 games too. But when it comes to Jacob Voracek, he was involved in the infamous Jeff Carter deal, where the Flyers sent Jeff Carter to the Blue Jackets for Jacob Voracek and 2 draft picks, which would end up becoming Sean Couturier and Nick Cousins. Honestly, one of the biggest fleecings in NHL history, but obviously, as you guys know, Jacob Voracek went to the Flyers, had some major success there and some great seasons, especially point-wise. I mean, 2018, 85 points in 82 games. Some others like 2015, where he got 81 points in 82 games, was a great player overall for the Flyers, even though the inconsistencies were there. The offensive ceiling was great, and he had a great prime with the Flyers. But now, obviously, he's back with the Blue Jackets with the Cam Atkinson trade, back after all these years, and I think it's a little bit awkward after how that whole situation ended, but the Blue Jackets get Jacob Voracek back, and he's still a pretty good player, and I think he'll have a pretty good few years left in him too. So for the Blue Jackets, they get a little bit of him back, but still, his prime was mostly with Philadelphia. But now moving on to the third NHL player that moved to a former or original NHL team, we're going to go to a guy that in terms of trades in the past decade was absolutely infamous. It seems like every single trade he was involved in, it was a steal for one team or the other. And we're going to have another player involved in the Columbus Blue Jacket system because of course, and we're going to move on to the 43rd overall pick back in 2011 by the Chicago Blackhawks in Brandon Saad. Now Brandon Saad, as I said before, trade-wise was infamous, but he played a big part in the Blackhawks in his first 4 seasons, his last season getting 52 points in 82 games played, and he was looked at as a major part of that core going forward. But the cap space didn't quite agree with the Blackhawks, and they had to ship him off to the Columbus Blue Jackets in a trade that benefited the Blue Jackets a ton. They got Brandon Saad and a couple of nobodies, and the Blackhawks got guys like Anisimov, which were good players, but not up to the level of Brandon Saad's level. But the Blackhawks, a couple of years later, were trying to get Brandon Saad, and they ultimately did. Now, what did they give up for him? A couple of draft picks, maybe a couple of good prospects. They gave up Artemi Panarin, and it would not work out for them, to say the least. He would go on to have great seasons in Columbus, and Saad would be out of Chicago relatively quickly. After that trade, he only played 3 seasons with them and would get shipped off to the Colorado Avalanche, where once again the Blackhawks got fleeced. They got Zadorov back, who was awful for them, and now Saad is in St. Louis. And even though he's not back with Chicago right now, he got shipped back to Chicago, it seems like millions of times, but he'll be most known for his time in Chicago and the trades that also came with it. Now we're going to go to another player that stuck with their original team after all, the fourth NHL player to do it, and we're going to move on to another guy that's had a pretty prominent role over the past decade with two teams, mainly the Philadelphia Flyers and the Toronto Maple Leafs. We're going to move on to the second overall pick back in the 2007 NHL draft, and we're going to move on to James Van Riemsdijk, a guy who was originally drafted by Philadelphia and had some pretty good seasons there, but only played 3 seasons before getting shipped off in an infamous 1-for-1 deal. But before that happened in 2012, which was his last season, he got 24 points in 43 games played. The year before that, 40 points in 75 games, and even though it wasn't up to like a second overall pick level perhaps, he was still doing pretty well for Philadelphia until the 1-for-1 trade happened where the Flyers sent him to Toronto for defenseman Luke Schenn. Now, I think we can all pretty much agree that the Leafs definitely won that trade, and especially with Luke Schenn in Philadelphia, I mean, that was just kind of irrelevant compared to what James Van Riemsdijk was doing in Toronto. Just that next season, he would get 32 points in 48 games and would continue a steady, a healthy pace of points throughout the next few years. But he would eventually go into free agency away from the Toronto Maple Leafs and would end up choosing the Philadelphia Flyers to return once again. And so far, he's been pretty good there. He's played 3 seasons since he got back, and this last year got 43 points in 56 games played. It is definitely an overpayment, but James Van Riemsdijk returned back to Philadelphia where he belonged, where he started out, and is putting up some great production for them in the end. Now, this is honestly one of the funniest situations of all these players. We're going to move on to the 5th NHL player to return to, technically, their original NHL team. Now, this guy was drafted by this team, didn't actually end up signing with them. He actually went back into the draft the next season, or actually 2 years later, and was selected by the Anaheim Ducks in a re-entry draft. And this was a guy that had some major talent and would build on that great play with Anaheim, then getting shipped off to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and is now back with his former team. At number 5, I have goaltender Frederick Anderson. Now, Frederick Anderson's story is one of the most interesting ones out there because, again, he declined to sign with the Carolina Hurricanes. Again, he was selected 7th in the 7th round, 187th overall, back in the 2010 NHL draft, and then skipped out on that chance, then later being drafted in the 3rd round, 87th overall in 2012 by the Anaheim Ducks, and that pick would be great for them as he would become one of their starters and one of their mainstays on the roster for the next few seasons, leading them to some great playoff and great regular season success. Then, of course, he was shipped up to Toronto, and the rest would be history. He's now back in Carolina and actually signed a deal with them for the next 3 seasons, and will be a big part of that team going forward, or actually the next 2 seasons, I believe. But when it comes to Freddie Anderson, he's back in Carolina, back where he was originally drafted, and again, actually signed. So he's only signed 1 contract with Carolina, but has been property of them for quite a while. We'll see what happens in Carolina, but it's cool to see that story come full circle. And next up at number 6, we're going to go to another player that ended up sticking with his original team multiple times and has signed multiple contracts with that original team, yet has been on so many different teams over the last few seasons. We're going to move on to the 26th overall pick in the 2007 NHL draft, and we're going to move on to St. Louis Blues draftee David Perron. Now, David Perron is a very interesting subject because, again, every single contract he signed has been with St. Louis, but he's played with the St. Louis Blues, the Oilers, the Penguins, the Ducks, the Vegas Golden Knights, and of course St. Louis, playing with multiple NHL teams, but always finding a way to play in St. Louis. And there was a very weird time during 2013 to 2019 where he played for all those different NHL teams. So he played in 2013 with the Blues, then played with the Oilers in 2014, then played with the Oilers once again in 2015, later being a trade on acquisition by the Penguins. He stuck there in 2016 too, then got traded to the Anaheim Ducks, then he went back to the St. Louis Blues, then got picked in the expansion draft by the Vegas Golden Knights, then went back once again to the St. Louis Blues, and that's where he's been for the past 3 seasons. It's been a roller coaster ride with David Perron, but he's back in St. Louis where I think he agrees he rightfully belongs. But next up, we're going to go yet again to another player that stuck with their original team after all, now got picked in the expansion draft, but was back with his original team for quite a while. We're going to move on to an 11th, or actually a 14th overall pick back in the 2011 NHL draft by the Dallas Stars in defenseman Jamie Oleksiak. Now, Oleksiak's time was also pretty interesting because he was also kind of all over the place. He played his first few seasons with the Dallas Stars, of course, then ended up being traded to the Pittsburgh Penguins for a conditional 4th-round pick in 2019, and would only play a season and a half there before basically having the same trade happen to him again. He was traded to the Dallas Stars for a 4th-round pick, was back with Dallas for quite a while, and of course got selected by the Seattle Kraken in the expansion draft. He's been all over the place, but also kind of not in the same way, but he's a guy that mostly is a Dallas Star, but obviously got a big pay to Seattle, which in that case was totally deserved. The Big Red deserves that paycheck, and he 100% deserves that bag. Now we're going to go to another guy that also stuck with his original team for a very long time, ended up being shipped off later in his career, and then found his way back to his original team. We're going to go on to an absolute legend, which is great that he's still playing, by the way. Going on to the 2nd overall pick in the 1997 NHL draft. Next up, I have Patrick Marleau. The 8th player on this list definitely deserves to be here because I think he's almost the prototype of this over the past couple of years, and one of the best examples of going to a former and original team. When it comes to Patrick Marleau, obviously he was drafted by the Sharks and stayed with the Sharks for a very, very long time until 2018, where he was traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs and was a big part of that team for quite a while in the locker room and on the ice. But although Marleau was great on the ice, his contract was definitely an overpayment, and once Kyle Dubas got into the general manager spot, he ended up trading him to the Carolina Hurricanes, and Patrick Marleau became a Carolina Hurricanes legend, by the way, and of course the rest would kind of be history as he would go back to the San Jose Sharks. After that, then he would go to the Pittsburgh Penguins for 8 games, and then back to the San Jose Sharks. Definitely a roller coaster past few years for Marleau, but let's be honest, he is 110% a Shark for life. Now we're going to go on to the 9th and final NHL player to return to his former team, technically not his original team because he was drafted by the New York Islanders in his draft, but mostly played with the Florida Panthers and the Vancouver Canucks. We're going to go on to one of the legends in hockey, in Roberto Luongo. Now Roberto Luongo is one of the most fascinating stories of a guy going back to his former team and actually having some pretty goodwill there. Now he of course started with the New York Islanders, but only played 1 season there really before getting traded to the Florida Panthers in a pretty infamous trade for the Islanders too. Didn't exactly work out too well for them. The Panthers got Luongo and Oleksiak, and the Islanders got Oleg Kavasha and Mark Parrish. It's fair to say the Florida Panthers definitely got the better end of that deal. But when it comes to Luongo, he'd only played the next few seasons with the Panthers before ultimately being traded again to the Vancouver Canucks, where he would have his best seasons, leading the team to the Stanley Cup final, having great seasons in the early 2010s and late 2000s. And once that was kind of over, once that cap bit and that team started to kind of dwindle, Roberto Luongo was once again traded back to the Florida Panthers when he was kind of at his best in terms of his early seasons. But he was back with the Florida Panthers and honestly had some of his better years too. Just looking at some seasons like 2017 and 2016. I mean, in 2016 he had a .922 save percentage in 62 games and had a .934 save percentage in 6 playoff games. Luongo was still a beast, kind of right to the very end, both for Vancouver and for the Florida Panthers. We're not going to talk about his time with the Islanders either, but you get what I mean. When it comes to Luongo, though, he was a guy that was almost a Florida Panther and a Vancouver Canuck at heart, just brought so much success and so much locker room success into both teams that he was on, and would later, of course, work with the Florida Panthers, is now with Team Canada, being the GM for this upcoming Olympics. It's fair to say Roberto Luongo is absolutely thriving, and is deserved, because the man is an absolute legend through and through. But that is going to be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy this breakdown and this ranking, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell if you haven't already. Comment down below, what do you guys think of these legends returning back to their former teams? How do you think guys like Chara and Jacob Voracek will do? And what do you think of all the players I mentioned today? Let me know all your thoughts down in the comments down below. Make sure you share this video with your friends, get it out there, and click on this card for all of my hockey rankings content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.